There is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing at all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that will lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of the comfort zone.
Welcome to the conversation. So today we're going to be talking about getting commitment, that thing you know that you need as a leader, the commitment, the engagement, the enthusiasm of your team. And you know that that is a top priority if you're going to achieve results in any capacity whatsoever. So you also know, if you've had any experience working with a team, that saying I want commitment and engagement and buy-in is easy to say and not so easy to deliver. So today we're going to try to give you the 7 essential steps that you need to take in order to get buy-in. And that's the focus for today. As you're going to see, a little bit of guidance makes it a little bit easier. So my guest today is Dave Garrison. He is the author of The Buy-In Advantage: Why Employees Stop Caring and How Great Leaders Inspire Everyone to Give Their All. I almost don't need to say anything more than that. I will say that Dave runs Garrison Growth, and that his focus is on helping leaders generate buy-in and get the best results for their team. He's a seasoned executive, a seasoned board member at organizations like Ameritrade. He's taught in the Young Presidents Organization, both globally and locally. Thousands of people have benefited from his wisdom, and today we get to hear from him. So Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Wanda. Glad to be here.
It's a pleasure. All right, so I always like to start why. Why do you care about this topic enough to write a book?
You know, I had great successes and great failures as a CEO of multinational companies and sitting on boards. And I realized the part of the job, the part of the mission I really loved was working with people to achieve their full potential. That was the magic for me. And so with some good friends, other CEOs kicking me in the butt and saying, then why don't you do that all the time? I shifted gears about 10 years ago to start just working with people in coaching and then leadership team development and then CEOs on how do we create that environment to allow people to achieve their full potential. So basically, it's pursuing my passion.
I love it. I love it. You know, I can't tell you how many times I hear from somebody who's led a business and they find out that establishing the business is fun, but basically the real fun is in developing the team, developing the organization, developing the capability. And so many say something very, very similar to what you said. All right. So I have to take a lead from your book title, The Buy-In Advantage: Why Employees Stop Caring. I'm going to stop right there. Why do employees stop caring?
You know, it's not a fault of the leaders. It's not that leaders are trying to make people not care. I don't know a leader who wakes up in the morning and says, I am setting out on my mission today so people don't care. But here's what's happened. This has become a crisis for 3 reasons. One is the pandemic caused people to rethink what they're looking for from a job. Rethink what they're willing to give up. Am I willing to drive an hour each way? Am I willing to give up being with my own kids or paying for childcare? Am I willing to keep doing that? And so a whole reexamination of what work means. And I think workers expect a lot more from their workplace than they did before, primarily around, do I align with a purpose and do I align with the people of what's going on at my organization? So number 1 was the pandemic. Number 2, new generation, Gen Z, coming on strong. And it's interesting because every generation is different, and these are generalizations. However, Gen Z is interested not only in money, but also interested in having an impact and having their voice heard. Different than other generations, which are looking for work-life balance and other things. And I know the cliche is we hear all the time, this generation doesn't know how to work. If they just put their minds to, or whatever. So we hear those myths, but the truth is we have an opportunity to capitalize on the interests of this generation to get better results. So the new generation is a second factor. And so the third piece is, do the executives at my company really care about my opinions and my experience. And that's what people are looking for. It's that ability to have impact, just like Gen Z, but it's broader than just Gen Z. So those three things have contributed to what I call the buy-in crisis. And if you look at the Gallup measure of employee engagement, they came out a couple of weeks ago and said, hey, it's a decade low engagement level in the US. It's pathetic at 1 out of 3 employees being engaged, meaning 2/3 of the people on a net basis show up, do what they're told to do, and they don't give it their all. And what a waste of time, what a waste of human potential.
Yeah, what a waste of capacity also, we might say. There was a whole bunch of things that would go into that one. All right, so 3 factors. Pandemic causes us to reevaluate what matters, how it matters, and what we can do and how we can do it. We expect more from jobs, both to have a purpose and the people that we work with. Younger generation is insisting on an impact. And I gotta say, as frustrating as that is to perhaps lead them, you know, it's not a bad thing that we have employees who want to make a difference in the world. Maybe that's a good thing. And then engagement is an all-time low. All right. So before I go too far, I want to make sure I understand what you mean by buy-in. To me, buy-in means commitment, engagement, but let's make sure I get your understanding of what it looks like.
Yeah, so here's a really simplistic example, but I think it works. If you go to, let's say you're a fan of European football. If you go to a Real Madrid game and you see the fans in the stadium, they are excited about what's going on. They care, they're passionate. If you go to a Friday night football game in the US, they care, they're passionate. What happens on Monday morning? How come that same passion and enthusiasm gets checked out in the parking lot? And so, you know, we're trained as students that there is a right answer and just do what the teacher says, and the boss is like the teacher, so just do what they say and things are all good. The problem is we've just left people out of the equation. What I want at work is I want somebody's passion. I want somebody to bring the same passion they do to the high school football game or Real Madrid that they bring to work. That to me is buy-in. Bring your whole self to work. Be a human being. Join us.
Right.
Be something great.
So I want the same passion you have for whatever you engage in on the weekend that you really thoroughly enjoy, that you look forward to. I want that showing up on Monday morning. But Dave, let me be contrarian just for a moment, which is sometimes then people show up with more passion than I know how to manage. Their passion wants to take it in a different direction than where I want to go as the leader. Like there's this corralling of the passion. And isn't that where the challenge comes in?
Well, you know what? That's where the opportunity is. So in the old school of leadership, leaders tell you what to do. And your job is to say, yes, boss. Yes, boss. Yes, boss. In the new world, leaders have the opportunity to be really clear about what the desired outcome is, what the compelling purpose of the organization is, what our values are, and then ask people to join in how we create solutions that will get there faster. And that's different than telling people what to do. So we see the role of a leader as developing people's capabilities to think and participate. So if somebody comes in and has a passion and really passionate about doing something that we think is totally crazy, that's where in the book we talk about your opportunity is to be curious, because curiosity and judgment cannot coexist. So if your reaction as a leader is to say, nope, that's not what we're doing today, you'll never hear another idea from that person. So you don't have to worry about buy-in. You won't have any. If instead you say, wow, do you know what? That's a really interesting idea, Wanda. What does that do for us? Can you help me understand? And how did you come up with that? And what else did you consider? You're able to then engage in a discussion and redirect that passion against the compelling purpose of the organization or the key objectives. But if you just dismiss it and say, you know, it's a really great idea, we don't have time for that right now, what I need you to do is you've just cut off buy-in. You've cut it off at the knees.
Yeah, and not only for that person, for everybody witnessing it as well, because then they know, don't have an idea because this boss isn't open to it. All right, so let me do one more. You said people want more today. They want to have a purpose. They want people that they work with. They want to have an impact. So kind of what is it that you think people are really expecting today? And I do think it's different. I think it's changed.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is they're expecting for their voice to be heard. And sometimes I hear leaders say, well, that will bring us to our knees because for every decision, you want me to go to every single person and say, what do you think? And actually, that's not what we're proposing. In the book, we talk about this idea of collective genius. It's recognizing all of us are smarter than any of us. Even if you're God's gift to leadership, you've got a blind spot and you only know what you know. But collectively, we know a lot more. So the question is, what are techniques you can use to gather collective genius to solve issues? And as a leader, this is not a free-for-all. This is a very clearly stated, here's the desired outcome we're looking for, and here's what the criteria of great looks like to me. Meaning, here's the checklist in my head. I'm curious about your ideas on how we could accomplish this in the fastest fashion with the least effort. And as long as you're directing the conversation, which you are, through a clearly stated outcome and a clearly stated checklist, you're going to get ideas you never considered that might be better than yours.
All right. I can see why this works really, really well when we're trying to drive change or implement something new or add a new product line or service line. I can see why there's a place and a moment for more ideas. And that the curiosity from people is what I want to get in. And that's where the enthusiasm and excitement comes because they can say, right, I can explore it and I can learn and all those things that we know drive human potential. But if I'm running a steady state business where the issue is efficiency, utilization of capital in a really smart, clever way, and I've kind of got it refined to just an engine, it seems harder to adapt this. Okay, here's what I want. Tell me how else we can do it better kind of approach. So give me your rebuttal on that one.
Yeah, well, if you think you've got it all figured out and what you're doing now is good enough, you don't need any buy-in because what you're doing is good enough. If you go, no, we can always make improvements and drive for improvements, then you have the opportunity to identify what would improvements look like in what area. Is it delivery times? So let's use Amazon as an example. If we look back 3 or 4 years ago, Amazon was just fine because they got you stuff overnight, and that was great. But they didn't stop there. They said, how can we make it even faster? And so they revamped distribution to put products out close, the most common products out closer to people. And then they said, we'll guarantee you overnight delivery. And then they kept pushing and said, how could we do same-day delivery? And so they could have just said, look, we're steady state. We're great. We're Amazon. Look at all these sales. Look how successful we are. So if good enough is good enough, no need for buy-in. If we can be better, if we're good and we're going to build on it, but we can be better is the attitude, then buy-in counts. So define specifically what you mean by efficiency, what your criteria or your checklist is for a particular aspect of efficiency, and then ask people to brainstorm, bring their experience.
All right, so let me see if I've got your argument straight here. One is whether we like it or not, the expectations of our workforce today have shifted for a host of reasons. The expectations now involve I want to do something that has some significant purpose with people that I enjoy. I want to be able to have an impact. And by the way, I want somebody to listen to what I have to say, what my experience and my ideas are. So I want to have that voice heard. If I want to keep people, I want their brains engaged, bringing ideas. I want to create this collective genius that you talk about. Then I have got to be open to hearing those ideas and doing something with them. But I'm not inviting open ideas randomly. Just give me any old idea. I'm giving an end state that I want to achieve. A goal, a mission, a values, limitations, a boundary conditions, and say within those bounds, give me everything you've got that will get us there faster and more effectively, whatever the criteria are.
Yes. Then make sure when the ideas come to you, you do not confuse curiosity and judgment. Because if you sit as the judge of those ideas, well, Wanda, that's a pretty good idea, but we tried that before. Well, Wanda, that's really interesting, but don't you think instead we should? As long as you give that reaction, I guarantee that's the last idea you will hear.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
just cut off buy-in. Curiosity
That was-
looks like, yeah.
Curiosity is that openness, the willingness to explore. Even if I happen to think that that isn't going to work, I've got to understand where you were coming from, why you had that idea, what else you considered, what's underneath it, because that is frequently the unlock for a slight shift that might work, or for seeing something I hadn't been willing to see up until that point. Okay. All right.
Absolutely.
You
So
have.
Yeah, that's asking questions like, what led you to that? How did you know that was a good idea? What else did you consider? The things we talk about, that's the curiosity that will unlock insights for you. And you as a leader can build on that, given your experience, and say questions like, well, I'm interested if you added this criteria, how would your thinking change? And that's how we build that muscle.
And that's how you help people see for themselves that maybe that idea is too expensive, or whatever else it is that you want to drive the message for. All right. So got a sense of buy-in. We want that passion, the same passion you have on a weekend activity, a sporting event, a music concert, or whatever it is. We want that same passion showing up Monday morning, Tuesday morning, Wednesday morning, Thursday morning, Friday morning at work. Okay, now you have 7 strategies. Just list them off for us in terms of creating buy-in.
Yeah, we've referenced a couple of them already. It's harness the power of collective genius. Use systems that are outlined in the book that are easy, low cost, no cost, to collect ideas in a structured way and select from the best choices, as opposed to, what do you think of this idea, which cuts people off at their knees. So 1, harness the power of collective genius. 2 is adopt a drama-free problem-solving system. No need for debate, no need for discussion. It's a process that says, let's give you what the desired outcome is and criteria. Let's agree on the criteria. Let's then brainstorm on our own. And then let's look at all the brainstormed ideas without discussion, without judgment, and basically vote, weigh the odds, select which idea is best, then begin the discussion, as opposed to wasting the discussion on ideas that we end up saying, don't like that one. So number 2 is drama-free problem-solving system. Number 3, we referenced it before, focus on questions instead of answers. Managers give answers. When somebody says, what do you want me to do about this? If you tell them what to do, you've just cut off the buy-in. You've given them permission to be a robot. And that doesn't create buy-in. If instead you ask a question, what would you do? You'll have a different conversation. Prioritization is number 4. 3 is greater than 7. Here's new math. 3 is greater than 7. If you've got 7 priorities, you've got no priorities. As an organization, we'll go into an organization, we'll interview the top leaders, and we'll always say, hey, what are the most important strategies that your organization is working on right now, that the senior team is working on? Usually, we hear them describe different things. And if that's the case, it's hard for the organization to pull together to focus on a few things. So 3 priorities, company-wide, repeated, with the reason why those are important by leadership. So prioritize the few things that really count, number 4. Number 5, this is hard, slow down to include everyone. I know you're in a hurry, but if you want to scale an organization, slow down to include people and model the behavior that will get the best thinking out of everybody and let everybody in the organization know this is how we do it. So slow down to include everyone. And then 6 is create effective containers for conversation. That's code word for quit those meetings of updates. Shoot them in the head. No more departmental meetings of updates. I don't care if you ever turn to operations again and say, what's new in operations? Let us know. Just give it up, because that doesn't create buy-in. That's just automon, drop a quarter in the slot and tell me what's going on in your area. Instead, how about if you distribute that same information in writing ahead so everybody can read it ahead of time and reflect on it and ask meaningful questions at the meeting, and use the time in the meeting for insight and discussion, not for robotic reporting. So containers for impactful conversations. And number 7, checklist item, basic hygiene. Make sure that you have a clear, compelling purpose understood by every single person in your organization, and clear, understood values, no more than 3 or 4, please, that are put into practice every day and referenced with every decision. So compelling purpose is used in hiring, it's used in promotion, it's used in reviews, it's used in decision making, and ditto on values. So those are the 7.
They seemed like rather straightforward. So just to repeat: collective genius, using the power of collective genius; adopt a drama-free problem solving. There's a technique for doing that. Questions, not answers. 3 priorities, repeated, understood by everybody, no more. Slow down to include everybody. Create efficient containers for impactful meetings. Translate, get rid of the updates. I'll come back to that one in a minute. And clear, compelling purpose that we reference all the time in our decisions, in our hiring, and everything. Okay. What's not to love about that? Those all make incredible sense. So we've talked a little bit about the collective genius idea, this getting other people involved, getting rid of the judgment, and so on. I want to talk for a minute about the drama-free problem solving. Because, well, if you can solve the drama-free issue, I might well be out of a coaching job, which is okay. I got other things to do. That would be all right. But honest to goodness, the amount of drama is incredible. When you say drama-free, you mean that we're talking about the substance, not challenging each other. Is that what you mean by drama-free?
It is, and we have an agreed upon process that allows all voices to be heard. And I'm glad to give you a couple of examples.
Great, love to hear them.
Let's say we're in a team meeting and there are 9 or 10 people in the room. First of all, that's not the size of group that can have a meaningful discussion. And let me give you a practical example. If you have a dinner party at your house, how many couples can you have over before the discussion breaks into 2 or 3 different conversations at once? How many people can be in the room? What would you say?
It has. 8 is when it's going to break down, in my experience.
Yeah, you've got very polite guests. In mine, it's 6. 6. But if you've got 9 or 10 people and you want everybody's ideas, one process way to do this is to break into groups of 2 or 3 to have discussions on very focused topics and then report back. And what you'll find is you will get 80% of the content that you need to get, and everybody feels like their voice is heard. And when people feel heard, they're more willing to buy into whatever decision you come up with. So very focused discussion topics, small groups, are one way to create drama-free problem solving. The alternative is, in a group of 8 or 9 or 10, let's ask a question and let the person who is the loudest, the most aggressive, the person with the biggest title, lay out an idea, and then somebody starts debating that, and all the other ideas are left in the dustbin. And so we don't get the benefit of everybody's thinking. Another technique, when you ask a question, give people a minute of silence to reflect and anchor into their own thinking, as opposed to letting the first one shout it out. And even better, if you have a really serious discussion going on, provide the data at least 24 hours in advance, because what we know about human beings, about half of us process information overnight. So if you want to have a real discussion with data, if you have the discussion today, you'd better have it again tomorrow when the rest of us can participate.
Right. I certainly know some organizations, not many, but some organizations who will present the data, the question, the opportunity on one meeting, and then the discussion and decision is referred to the subsequent meeting. So that means we have a chance to understand it, to really think about it, and to talk with each other. One of the other things I find today is people want to talk to each other. They want to say their ideas to someone else who hears it and reacts to it and says, me too, I had the same thought. It's all of that that creates the bonds that make it possible to say, hey, great, here's an idea.
Absolutely. And that's what the small group discussion does, because some people are reticent to offer an idea in a group of 10. Well, I probably am not the one to offer an idea, but when you're in a group of 3 people, you're comfortable going out and being vulnerable and saying, hey, this could be a crazy idea, but here's what I got. And you get reaction to that idea, and your idea will spark other people's thinking.
Absolutely. And I was going to pick up another thing that you said there. When the loudest person or any one person offers an idea, it is true in our brains that we then start circling that idea. So the next things that you will get will be all related to the same example. And you then have to do something to shock your brain to move on to a different topic. I don't want to steal the thunder here, but there's an old experiment where if I were to ask you to name every animal you think of, you would get 15-ish, plus or minus, and then you get stumped. Now, clearly, you know more than 15 animals. But because you started with a gorilla, you're going to give everything that's around the gorillas, related to gorillas, and you're going to get stumped. I give you another activity. I make you come back again in a minute or two. You'll give me another 15 or 20. Then you'll get stuck again. The same thing happens in a group. So we don't want one idea to be the that keep everybody thinking that way. So this thinking separately is really powerful. Sorry, that was a long discourse on what is actually your work, but I'm totally bought into how important that is for getting ideas. Okay.
And that same idea applies, Wanda, when we go to the brainstorming stage. So we've laid out the clearly defined problem. We've agreed on what the criteria, the checklist is of a great solution. And then we begin brainstorming. We do that on our own, then share in small groups, and then list them out with no discussion. So no judgment at all. Just whatever the idea is, it's equal value, post it. Then trust people's experience, trust people's wisdom to vote, and just say, look, you've got 5 votes. You can place them any way you want against this list of 20 ideas, and we're not going to talk about each of the 20. So we don't get down that rabbit hole of reacting to each idea. We react silently by our vote, and our power and our voice is in our vote.
Yeah. I have to tell you, I've done this kind of an exercise with teams around the world 100 times. It has never failed me. And everybody's pretty excited about it. And nobody feels bad. It's like, yeah, that was a crazy idea. I'm not even sure I'd back it. Okay, I'm not voting for it. I'm voting for somebody. It's really powerful. All right. I want to go to the next piece of the puzzle. You make a big deal in the book about judgment. About the ways in which leaders get stuck in judgment. That won't work. We've tried that before. I don't like that idea. I don't want to do that. Why is it that we have such a hard time getting out of judgment mode?
You know, my guess is, first of all, it's up to every individual. My guess is, look, that's what's been modeled for me. What did we learn in school? We learned there was one right answer, and our job was to guess what the right answer was or please the teacher. Therefore, I must be the teacher now. I'll give a right answer, and I'll tell you whether or not your idea measures up to my idea. And so there's an alternative. There's an alternative, and that's to say, you know, as we talk about when somebody brings you an idea, your role as a leader is to understand their thought process and augment their thought process through your experience. Or if you as the leader have an idea, the worst thing you could do is come in Monday morning and say, hey team, I've got an idea. What do you guys think? Because you're leaving people to say, oh, great idea, boss. The alternative is to do the work, to work backwards and ask yourself, what specific problem is this great idea addressing? Number one. Number two, how do I know it's a great idea? You know it's a great idea because it meets 3 or 4 of the checklist items in your head. So leaders have an opportunity to take their great idea and unpack it in their head before they ever say a word about it. And what that looks like is asking themselves, what specific problem does this great idea address? And how do I know it's a great idea? Then share with your team, here's the problem I've been thinking about, and here are the elements of a great solution. Not what is the solution, but a great solution is something we can afford, simple enough everybody will understand. It is something that we can repeat, and it's something we can monitor the progress of. Those might be your criteria. Then ask your team to come up with their best thinking. Give them a day or two. Ask them to come forward with their ideas. And so we say in the book, The Buy-in Advantage, leaders go last. So your idea is offered last, not first. And leaders go last except when it comes to vulnerability. So your judgment about this is a great idea or your idea won't work, all cut off the buy-in advantage.
Okay, I like this idea. So I'm going to take so I have an idea as a leader of a team, and then I'm going to back up and say, what is the problem I'm really trying to address? Which forces me not to just come in and let's launch something new because it's new. I'm actually asking the question, what problem is this really solving? And then why is it great? Why do I like it? What are my criteria? And I back up and then I go through the criteria and the problem and let people come up with their own ideas. And then again, we're back to a vote or a brainstorm or a build on or whatever. There's a phenomena that I spend half my life also dealing with, and that is that leaders love detail. They love to get in the weeds. They love to know exactly what's going on. And then so the moment they get into those details, they tend to want to kindly, gently, nicely tell people how to fix things. And it's all with the intention of making things better, but there's this desire to have the solution, the answer, and fix. And it is the hardest thing to stop if you are a detail-oriented person, because you feel like your value is giving the answer.
Yes.
And what you've just given is a way not to give the answer.
Yes, it's so true. And I'll give you
I love it.
a quick story. So a great leader that we know, Jeff Edison of Phillips Edison Company, came into a executive offsite and a small group of people around the room. And he said, hey, before we get started, I've been thinking about our executive team and I want to bring a new member on. And I said, Jeff, have you given this a lot of thought? He said, yes, I have, because he's a very thoughtful person. So I knew he had. And I said, before you tell us the name of the person, how did you know this was the right person? So I was asking him what was his criteria. And he said, well, there's somebody who thinks differently than the rest of us, somebody who works hard, and somebody who has respect in the organization. And I said to the team, I said, is there any other criteria? Are there any other criteria you would add to that list? And they added 2 or 3 more. And then I said to the team, all right, take a minute on your own. I'd like you to identify a name or a couple of names of people who could be on our executive team that would meet those criteria. Minute of silence. And then I said, okay, who do you have? And they started listing out some names, and they probably came up with 10 names. And I said, all right, Jeff, do you want to tell us who you had in mind? He said, I want to go back and think about it. This was really good discussion. This was helpful. And so that's a great example of somebody who has an idea as a leader, good idea, bright leader, of what they want to do. But when they went through this process, it helped enlighten their own thinking.
So did they end up putting that person on the executive team, or did something else happen? I have to know the conclusion.
Something else happened. It did not roll out the way that it was originally envisioned. The person he had in mind was not the person added to the executive team at that point in time. Later, they were.
All right. I love that. Even a very powerful, very thoughtful, very intentional leader can benefit from, I hadn't thought about it that way. All right. I want to shift gears for a little bit. You talk in the book about the notion of buy-in as a way to make sure that the organization is keeping up with the passion and intensity of the leader. Because usually the leader of whatever activity is going on is gun-ho enthusiastic about forward and make a difference and all that kind of thing. And you want to keep the company going forward. But I want to ask about the reverse. Occasionally, I have seen, more often than not, leaders who are super gung-ho, way out charging ahead, way out in front of what everybody can keep up with, and they don't have anybody behind them. So can that passion and energy be too much?
I don't think it can be too much because people respect that and they admire that. But what the leader can do is over-communicate the purpose and recognize people's efforts to meet that purpose and just call out when people are doing the kind of behavior they want to see. If they flood the organization with too many priorities, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing that? You put people in a very awkward position. And I'll tell you the story of an unnamed company in New York City where we interviewed second-level leaders and we said, what's it like to work here? And they said, it's miserable. We said, why is it miserable? And they said, because we get flooded with all these ideas from our leaders and we can't possibly do them all. So then when we go to staff meetings, we pray that they don't ask about the ones that we can't focus on because of their 20 ideas. I can only focus on 2 or 3. So we pray they don't ask about the ones we're not focusing on. So the leader is like a searchlight. And God help you if the searchlight falls on you and you're not working on that idea. So what we can do as leaders with that enthusiasm and that energy is to write down all of our ideas and then prioritize our ideas and reinforce those few ideas again and again and again, and then call out the behavior we want to see with tied to specific values or tied to purpose or tied to our objectives. So it's really important that you look down the mountain and just say, hey, you're making good progress. I'm really glad you brought extra oxygen and food so we can all have snacks on the way up.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. I see too often too that priorities become very generalized priorities. So I may get it down to 3, but actually buried under those 3 are 5 more each. So I've got really 15 when all is said and done.
Yes, we've seen that too.
Or we use very ambiguous language around the priorities. So it could mean anything I wanted it to mean. I happen to be dealing with a client at the moment who's doing exactly that. So, but you mean 3 very specific, actionable, measurable priorities so we know where we put our emphasis. And if something new comes up, refocus priorities, not just throw in and throw in and throw in. It's keeping it down to 3 maximum that people can really focus on. All right. What else do I want to ask you about? I just want to make a comment about, could we not have any more meetings that are update meetings? These drive me bananas. And if you stop to think about how much time is used collectively for everybody to hear how everybody else is doing, I got 10 people in a room for an hour. That is 10 person hours that I just consumed. There's a better way to do an update, for sure, a better way to do an update. Record it, send it out as a video message, write it down, send it as a document. I mean, there's much better ways to do that one. All right, last question I want to ask you, Dave, is about accountability. So I see accountability as a bit of a watchword that everybody is talking about. Accountability here and ownership and, et cetera. But it strikes me that your process is actually really what we want from accountability, because that's what you're getting in buy-in. So you're setting out a goal, you're setting out criteria for accomplishing a great goal, you're saying what's the steps along the way, and that's what gives people a sense of accountability. Do you agree? Do you disagree?
I agree, and I would say to you that if a leader tells me in my coaching practice that so-and-so is not accountable or they're not performing, I would honestly say, let's start by looking in the mirror. So if I were to call them up right now and ask them how they would describe what their priorities are and what great looks like, would it line up with your words? And I am guilty of this. I think I express myself perfectly when I ask someone to do something. And yet, if I don't take the extra step of saying, hey, you know what? Sometimes I think I'm perfectly clear and I'm not really clear. Could you tell me what you understood to be done by when? And if we don't get that two-way handshake, then we're going to be disappointed in 2 weeks when they don't do what we thought. And then we'll accuse them of not being accountable when in fact we didn't have agreement at the front end. So I think one piece of accountability starts at the beginning of the discussion, having agreement on what's to be done. And that's not me telling them what's to be done. It's going through the process we talked about of collective genius, and then asking them to tell me back their understanding of what's to be done, by when, what are the check-ins that are going to occur, and will you let me know if you run into any snags? And importantly, how can I assist you?
I think this is just as true when I'm setting out a goal and criteria and I want people to brainstorm it. You need to check that what I meant by that goal and those criteria, or what I thought I said, is what people understood. I think even that step is important before you get launching down too far on the line. All right, Dave, without a doubt, there are clear clues in here on how to be, to get buy-in, to get that passion and engagement, to make sure that people feel that their voices are heard, and to be an inspirational leader. I think this is the playbook for what we want by inspiration. So just to reverse, I'm looking at the collective genius, not just me. I want a drama-free problem-solving process, which is I lay out a goal, what look good looks like, what the criteria are, and ask people to give their ideas. I ask questions, not give answers. I've got 3 priorities, not 5 or 7 or 15. I'm going to slow down to include everyone because that's how I get to go fast ultimately at the end. I'm going to create effective containers for meaningful conversations, impactful conversations, not just updates. And I want a clear, compelling purpose that we think about, refer to, use regularly so people understand it and know what it is. Pretty good playbook. Dave, what did I miss?
Well, in the book, we also lay out an assessment because we all have blind spots. What we see in our organization is not the way everybody sees it. So what we recommend is start with assessment, have your executive team each take this assessment in the book and then compare notes and identify, look, here are a couple of areas of low-hanging fruit we can start on right now. No more than 3, please. And call on the collective genius to identify how we can improve our culture to improve results by having higher buy-in. So start there. Simple. It costs nothing. It's just take the time and do the work.
Okay. All right. And the assessment is at the back of the book, which is the buy-in advantage, why employees stop caring and how great leaders inspire everyone to give their all. Dave, if somebody wants to reach you, what's the best way to get in touch?
If you go to buyinbook.com, you can reach us there or check for Dave Garrison on LinkedIn. You can reach me there as well. And we love feedback. We love to hear stories. We love to hear about challenges and how you achieve buy-in.
All right. I love it, Dave. That's fantastic. So Dave Garrison, my guest for today. And we'd also love to hear from you, not just Dave. So send us a note on outofthecomfortzone.com. And until next week, we'll see you then.
Thank you for joining us today. Tune in for another edition next week with Dr. Wanda Wallace on the Voice America Business Channel. Reach outside your comfort zone this week.